There were victims here and there were villains here. And this story takes the side of the victims. I think this is a moral bullshitting it is. I think they should stop it. Tell me, do you think this film would have seen a release if the Narendra Modi government wasn't there? That was my question. I feel religion should be kept at home and not brought to offices and into schools and into government. It should not be. That is true secularism. It's seditious to say Bharat tere tukde honge in a university that is run with taxpayers' money. I don't want to appeal to the left liberal side because, I mean, see, they have been always saying that they have intellectual heft in the country. I agree. The question is whether they're honest. So, I mean, if somebody, they say, no, you can actually wake up a sleeping person, but you cannot wake up a person pretending to be asleep.
A very good evening. Namaste and welcome back to Citti Media. We've had so many requests coming since the last week, Prakash Belawadi, when we did the interview on the Kashmir Files, and we've received an extraordinary amount of requests that there needs to be a part 2, especially because we did that particular interview when I had not watched the movie. And right now, the kind of response that the movie has gotten, did you or the entire team expect that?
Because of the success that the Tashkent Files got 3 years ago, when it was declared a sleeper hit, and it did so well in spite of a kind of orchestrated campaign by these left liberal critics who gave it a half a star, 1 star, or 0 star kind of thing. It took some time for it to become a hit, but it did, by word of mouth, become a hit. So we knew, I certainly knew that the film would do well, but I don't think anyone expected what this response. I think it's just that when the public decides that they want something and they want to promote it, and no PR machinery, nothing can actually beat it. The word of mouth that the public can do.
We've had several movies in the past which have crossed 200, 300 crore club, but mostly because they're entertaining movies or have a different reason for success. Now, like you rightly said, this particular movie did not have a PR machinery backing, in the media circles, so to speak. So do you think, what would be the reasons you would attribute to the success of this, especially since it's about to cross 200 crores at the box office?
I think there has been some kind of a misunderstanding about the public taste. I think if you see in the past, the traditional Indian film or the traditional Indian play packed a lot of tragedy, even melodrama. And I think people like a sweep of emotion. They want to be moved. And, the affect that any story does to them is what they really want. To say that they want to be just entertained is actually this is actually the what you call as kind of escapist idea that lazy storytellers have, because they cannot construct a story, which packs a lot of emotion and meaning, and because they do loosely structured films, they pretend that, the public likes it. Actually, the public may or may not like it. They may watch all kinds of films, but they certainly will watch movies that give them, an emotional, leaves an emotional impact for them. It's an aesthetic of understanding, of empathy that they really look forward to, I think.
How does this particular movie change the scope of the film industry or the nature of how movies were made? Because in the last 6 to 7 years, you see that there is a rightward shift, or there is an emergence of the center-right narratives, even from Bollywood as well, with movies like Uri, making a really big amount of money based on what the sentiments of nationalism are, especially since the Modi government took over. So are you optimistic that there is a change of that sort, or is this an isolated success?
See, one or two things that, the movie establishes very seriously for the industry to look into. One is that, you don't need these superstars to make a blockbuster. You can call this an exception. Maybe the public won't do this again, you could say. But the thing is, we have to try it. Nobody has made a film like this before. So I think this idea that you need superstars, to pull in crowds, I think that needs to be tested now, because if you get a superstar to make a film, you need exotic locales, you need to spend a lot of money, you need to create some expensive dance sequences, item numbers, and so on, and you probably blow up 150 crores making the blockbuster. So if it earns 200 crores, it's not a big deal. This is a very small budget film, very small budget. Okay, so when you do this, I think producers, people who put money into these films, will have to seriously look into this idea, whether you need superstars to it. I mean, you can have superstars to make a film because they're good actors that suit those roles. Otherwise, I think that formula may or may not work, because you spend a lot of money on many films, not all become hits. And here, if you make films like this, and there are stories aplenty, if you make films like this, then the risk is smaller. You can make a slew of films like this, and maybe you can try out new ideas. The other thing that that the film actually does for you is that the public is not looking for an expensive PR campaign. I need it actually. Social media does it. They don't need anything else now, I think. So I think films can now be made for much less money than before.
So this is a very good example of how word of mouth actually works, and it's worked miracles for the movie. Addressing some of the criticisms that came from a certain section, although giving them the benefit of the doubt, saying that the movie is not up to the expectations, etc. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. So the first point that is being brought out is, the first thing is this movie has to be some sort of an art film, especially because it deals with such a serious subject. It deals with an exodus, a genocide that happened in the Kashmir Valley. And on the other hand, they're the same people who say that, there are not enough songs in the movie. So is there even a mandate as to what exactly is bad and good about the movie?
I think the question of whether there should be songs in a movie has been settled long back. Madras Cafe, the first film that I did in Hindi, he didn't have any songs. I think that has been laid to rest some time ago. And really, Sharan, it did 12 crores yesterday, on a Tuesday. So I think everyone should stop prescribing how the film should have been made. The public has decided that they like it. And if you don't like it, I think it's just a private quarrel that you can have with the movie. I don't think anyone should be any more prescribing and instructing Vivek Agnihotri on how he should make a film.
Right. And the other criticism that is obviously coming out is that it's a propaganda movie. And based on a few select criticisms, I think that has been also picked up by a certain portion of political leadership in Kashmir and in Delhi. And they're echoing the same sentiments that these reviewers have written about the movie.
I would like to take some time to, I want time to answer this question. What is propaganda? Now let's go back 50, 60, 70 years, when the Indian government decided that the state had to recognize artists and writers and give them awards, So what they did was, when filmmakers, whether they believed it or not, who is to say, but when filmmakers made films that kind of supported the ideological line of the ruling party, the social and political line, when the films took those lines and the films were made on shoestring budgets, what the governments have been doing is they have been appointing Soviet-style juries, which actually valorize these filmmakers and give them nominate them and give them awards. And then Doordarshan, which was under monopoly control, was a monopoly. There was no other rival private television channel. These films were showcased on Doordarshan, whether people liked it or not. To me, that sounds and seems like a correct example of propaganda. And here there is a film which has been made privately, and which didn't have enough money to make a big PR campaign. Or they didn't do big hoardings in the metros of India, and it was released. It was planned for release in only a few hundred screens on the opening day. It's the public that picked up this film. They're paying for this. They're paying they're buying tickets. That actually some groups are booking entire shows, and in groups they're going and watching. How can you call that propaganda? I think what they mean to say is that this film actually is one-sided. I agree with that. Okay, this film actually is on the whatever story counter narrative you have to this film. You have a point of view from the Congress party, or the point of view from the left party, or point of view from BJP itself, or a point of view from Jagmohan, from his book. You can have many counter narratives for it, I'm sure, or parallel narratives for it, I'm sure. But in all narratives, you have to assume and admit that there were people who had weapons, who killed people who didn't have weapons. There were victims here and there were villains here. And this story takes the side of the victims. So that way it is one-sided. It is telling the story of Kashmiri Pandits mainly. There may have been other victims also. That this film chose to tell the story of Kashmiri Pandits mainly, although there's a mention about others, there's a one-line mention, I think, but that is what this film did. In that way, it's one-sided. So in a crime, you must take the right side. You cannot actually have a debate saying, why the criminal did the crime. I think if that interests you, you need to make a film for another audience, not an Indian audience, perhaps.
Indeed, one of the political leaders from Kashmir, if I'm not mistaken, said earlier this morning or maybe yesterday that, what's happened has happened. It's high time that the Kashmiri Pandits and India forgives and forgets what has happened. And right now, at this point, the wounds are still fresh. So why do you want to worsen it and divide communities on communal lines?
This was a wonderful opportunity for all these, moral prescribers to say sorry, because we are all guilty, we are all implicated in this campaign of deceit and silence. And I think there's an opportunity for everybody to say sorry instead of saying, why do you want to open up the wounds? Actually, what is open up the wounds? They still live in refugee camps. They're still in exile. They live all over the world instead of the way they want to live, their home. So I think this is a moral bullshitting it is. I think they should stop it. And really, either they actually participate in some story to bring the Pandits back home or restore their properties to them. Or actually, when you don't have an answer, I think there's no need to talk. I think this is a mess these people are making for themselves by talking about a subject that really doesn't show them in very good light. They're just turning the focus on themselves, and a lot of people feel disgusted with this idea of propaganda and all these charges. This is a filmmaker has made a film. See, I asked a question, after a screening somewhere, there were 150, 200 people, was standing. And I asked this question. Tell me, do you think this film would have seen a release if the Narendra Modi government wasn't there? That was my question. Unanimously, the crowd shouted back, no way. They said, this film would not have been screened. So if that is true, and I think it is true, if that is the case, if the government can actually pick and choose what narratives it wants to push, and more importantly, what narratives it wants to block, it is the government that practices propaganda. A filmmaker has the right to make a subjective film. He or she has the right to actually look at a story, pick a side, and tell that story. It's absolutely the filmmaker's right. I mean, you don't like the film, don't watch it.
Yeah.
But this is nonsense. This, to call it propaganda, is nonsense. Basically, you're a propagandist. The people who are saying this is propaganda, they're situated in a propaganda for the last 70 years, I think. And they feel that anybody who counters that propaganda has to be labeled. I think a social scientist or a psychologist needs to look into this phenomenon and decide what this is, why they're doing this.
Indeed, one of the keywords used here is majoritarian mandate, and basically they blame the majority and are on the defensive and are not even apologetic of what happened. So how long this majority has been blamed, we all know. But finally, at the end of the day, there are voices like yours coming out. You're speaking about a lot of things without fear or being coerced into speaking about that. So, what do you have to say about this majority being blamed all the time? Because at the end of the day, if you are in the majority, do you always have to be blamed for what happens?
I accept the principle that it is the duty of whatever the majority is to look after the minority. I agree with that idea. I feel that if there is indeed a Hindu majority in this country that actually controls government, then it's up to the Hindu majority that got the government to ensure that the government looks after the minorities. I agree with that. But I don't agree with the definition of majority. In the case, under discussion now, Kashmir case of the Kashmiri Pandits, they were a minuscule minority in Kashmir. It was the majoritarian idea to say, leave, convert or die, was a majoritarian impulse. So if somebody has condemned that thing in the past, I think they are with me then. If somebody is selectively doing it, then I think they have had a run for so long. See, I'll tell you, in India, elections have been fought on this basis, even today. Nobody needs to win. I told you, nobody needs to win a majority really in an election. You need to win about 35% of the vote. So in previous elections, you got the vote of certain communities together, and you didn't care for anybody else. People always didn't care for anybody else. You went with a caste majority, or you got a minority bulk vote, that made you the majority. So basically, this idea of majority itself is nonsense. But I think what they mean is there are other majoritarian ideas are fine, but this idea of a Hindu majority idea is dangerous. I agree. I agree that idea of a Hindu majority can be very dangerous for minorities, which is why I think we should live by contract that everybody is equal in our society. Nobody, because of the caste or birth or anything, should have any entitlements. We can have positive discrimination, because for the Constitution mandates that for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they should be given certain protections and they should be given certain incentives, so that they can participate and compete in the mainstream. I think that is fair. What is not fair is to claim that because you're of a minority religion, you can have special laws, you can have special personal laws. You can actually, your places of worship can be left alone, but Hindu places of worship will be in the control of, of the government or the state. I think all these questions have to be asked, and I think the time has to come to settle them, because otherwise this Hindu majority idea can take a very dangerous turn. Because if you don't do it by principles of, egalitarian justice, then it will have by majority. It'll happen by majority, force. It will happen, which is why I think we should do fair contract in all matters. Which is why Parliament is there. Which is why we have the courts to interpret these laws. And if there is a situation like the hijab thing, for instance, then, we need to decide that question fairly. For instance, I mean, if you ask that question, I would answer. But, the thing is, I think the majoritarian Hindu idea can be a very dangerous idea for the minorities of India, and which is the reason why we should do fair contract, fair discourse on this. We should not shut down voices, that oppose you.
Yeah, the hijab issue was another thing that was finally put to dust, and that brought about a lot of debates on uniform civil code and how it's very important for the country going forward. But still, there is a sizable section opposing that at the end of the day, the girls should have gotten a particular right to wear what they want to, but also the court was very busy deciding on what rights that particular institution had, because at the end of the day, it's the institution's right to allow a certain dress code or not.
I think, Sharon, the question is not of a right or wrong, for the institution. It's not the legal right that matters here. I'll tell you, the court, for instance, can rule that women should be of in this whatever restrained age group. Can all women can go to Shabarimala. The court can rule, but in fact, does it happen like that? I don't know actually how many women have gone, when they have been restricted to Shabarimala, because the problem is of faith here. If you have faith in that deity and in the temple's, then you'll respect the temple's rules. And you as a woman would not go if you have faith. But if you don't have faith and you want to make a point and you go, then I think it's vulgar. That is the problem with this. So what happens is, if the court had decided that you can wear the hijab and go, and these girls had gone there, maybe private institutions will find a way, to see that you don't get admissions easily in some institutions. That you can set up all kinds of false barriers so that these girls who want to wear a hijab can get denied a seat without it being told that they're being denied a seat for this reason. You may not get jobs, if you wear hijab. Like private institutions can do this. I feel that in the hijab case, I do not want to say whether the girls should have worn a hijab or not. So I certainly would not have stopped them from wearing it, because it doesn't concern me in any way. It doesn't matter to me. But because you make this an issue, what happens is, supposing this becomes a serious issue and you wear a hijab, and then there is a counter movement, and then, the Hindutva side, families will send their children in religious garb.
Yeah.
And, it becomes a competing display of religion. I would feel uncomfortable about sending my children or grandchildren to such a school. I would look for private institutions where, my children will go to learn science and maths and so on, and not, to showcase their religion. The question has been brought up. Don't schools do prayers, and don't you wear bindi and all that? You have to determine whether bindi is what you wear for religion, or whether it's an item of fashion. So I think these are really complicated issues. But one thing I'm sure of, I don't think in schools you should do religious prayers. I think you need to stop that, because, I feel religion should be kept at home and not brought to offices and into schools and into government. It should not be. That is true secularism. Yeah. To have everybody displaying their religion is not secularism. It's just a mess.
Yeah, in fact, this reminds me, yesterday on national television, Kerala's governor, Arif Mohammed Khan, when he was addressing this particular issue, the news anchor asked a very protruding question, and Arif Saab in return asked, if one of your news anchors was to wear a hijab from tomorrow, would you allow that to happen? And there was absolutely no answer from the side of the news anchor whatsoever. So speaking,
that's why, I'll tell you, that brings up a very, very important issue. These are things, there may be, you could see, because you asked that question, a channel that makes a point by actually having a newsreader in hijab. It is possible that you will do it, okay, soon. I think you should expect it. My point is this. I think these should be settled inside the community. I think the college and the local community, the Parents Teachers Association should have come to some agreement and negotiated agreement and see to what extent you will allow this or not, going by a case-to-case basis. When you go to court, what happens? A court typically decides one side is right and the other side is wrong.
Right.
So what happens is you do not arrive at any kind of compromise. Societies live by contract. To me, as I said the last time also, even history is an agreement. You decide to bring up some things, you decide to not to bring up some things. But I think that consultation has not been done in the last 70 years when you're writing Indian history, when you decided to name the roads of Delhi by emperors. I think what was the criterion by which you did that? We were not asked. We, meaning the people of India, were not involved in a discourse when you decided this. A small group of Delhi intellectuals decided it. That should not have happened. So what I'm saying is, if the hijab question had been settled locally at Udupi or Mangalore or wherever it started, I think it would have been better had that happened, because people will decide what is good for them within the community. But when you go to court, what happens is you will leave one side entirely bitter. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not at all like a left liberal of today, but I'll tell you, my heart goes out to these people, because I feel I think they'll feel like they have not been consulted in any way or heard in any way in this matter by Indian society. Because I'll say that, for instance, I feel uncomfortable when the court says what is essential to what religion. I feel the court may, other people say, there are things that we don't know and we can't decide. I feel the court maybe should consider this, that maybe they should not answer every question that is put to them.
Right. Yeah, because the judiciary is expected to have wisdom that even humans can't possibly have on every subject matter that's there. So since we were also discussing Governor Arif Muhammad Khan, with regards to the movie, one of the narratives today that is being spun out, which is also being played out, which was also played out over the last 30 years, is that the governors are to blame for the violence and the exodus that happened. We saw this in Kashmir, we saw this in other states, we saw this even in Bengal when the elections happened, just a few months ago.
Jagmohan, if you just, you read about it after this, Jagmohan was not appointed by the VP Singh government first. I think Jagmohan was appointed first by Mrs. Indira Gandhi in 1994. And later he was continued in that post up to 89, I think, during the Rajiv Gandhi government. And on January 19th itself, when the pogroms began and the murders began in Kashmir, it was on the 19th itself, I think, that Jagmohan was appointed. To say that, he facilitated, he organized the exodus is completely false. I mean, how is it possible? I think I want to read up on this, because see, the thing is, I don't think he even made it to his office and took charge and was in control to do anything about this, because by the time he went there, the exodus had started in Kashmir, the killings had started, and the violence was happening everywhere. And he must have been completely helpless. I have not read his book, but I want to read his book now. The other thing I'll tell you about Jagmohan that is very important. If you see the movie, one thing that becomes clear is that nobody was actually in control at that time, when this was happening. I think the movie picks that very well. And you will see that none of these people who are opposing the movie are saying that, somebody was in control. That is correct in the movie. I feel it is possible and really, normal for Jagmohan to have thought that let these people go away because I can't protect them, or we cannot protect them. Maybe he could have felt. And for these killers and the apologists of these killers to say that Jagmohan could have done something about it begs the question on what they have done for the last 32 years, when they have been in power. I mean, the BJP government too. I think the Vajpayee government there, I think Vajpayee was a kind of soft leader who did not want to rake up things and, settle anything. And he was dependent on many people to stay in power. I think there were middle of the road or slightly left, supporters also in government. Certainly Nitish was that. Certainly a lot of us at that time in our lives, we were slightly or a little more left of center. So I think in Vajpayee's time, he could not have done it maybe, perhaps, and that's the benefit of doubt I could give. But what happened? There was the Janata government, there was a motley government in power before that. Some 3 prime ministers came and went. And then there was the Narasimha Rao government. And there was, 10 years of UPA 1 and UPA 2. The left participated in UPA 1. And then now we have had 7 years of Narendra Modi government. And the onus is there on the Narendra Modi government to do something about this. There must be something about this. If somebody says Narendra Modi government is going to derive political mileage from it, I think I agree with that. Let the government do something that will be popular in India, do the right thing. For the first time, giving justice to the victims of in Jammu and Kashmir state, including the Pandits, all victims, if you give them justice. Now, it will be a very popular idea in India. And this is what a government should do. It should do the popular thing and it should do the right thing.
If I were to redraw your attention back to the hijab issue, because you brought up a very important point there, said that there was a general sense of apathy towards one particular community by anybody in the government for that matter, whether it was a center-left party or a rightward Hindutva party. I think largely people do agree with that the Muslim minorities have been ghettoized to a very large extent, because of which there are certain unique characteristics that the Indian Muslim society has developed, and that has sort of stalled the efforts of modernization over the last 70 or more years for that matter. But when we also see on the other hand that, issues like reforms, like banning triple talaq or even talking about a uniform civil code comes, there is a strong opposition.
I think it's hard to do this. See, on the hijab issue, I think, Arif ji brought up a very important idea. Would a news channel permit? So supposing you prescribe a uniform for in the police force or in any other body, would you actually make concessions based on religious principles? We have done it. Let's say, for instance, the Sikhs are exempted from wearing a turban, a helmet, for instance, let us say. They're permitted to carry the kirpan or not. This used to be a controversy at one time. I'm saying if you make concessions, you do not make those concessions because there is a logical way of dealing with it. You do those concessions by agreement. You arrive at a compromise and you make that agreement. That is what I'm trying to say. I think had this been done by agreement, some places it may be okay to do it, and some places it may not be okay to do it. I'll tell you, if it's going to bother the public a lot, the government has to consider. See, in the past, they have banned movies, they have banned books. Why was satanic verses banned in India? It's because it was felt that those who can read English will read the work in English, and they'll feel upset about it. And, they will tell people who don't read English that this has been written in the book, and there'll be riots everywhere. And the government decided to ban it, not on the merits of the book. It was banned simply because, it was offensive to a certain religion. The Siddaramaiah government in my state, in its time banned 2 books in those 5 years, simply because a certain caste community was upset by that book. That is what it was, So when you was going to be upset, actually nobody had read the book, that, was going to, it was banned because of that. Many times you have done this because you do it by agreement. So if you want to have a state that will maximize the idea of freedom of expression, then you must protect not only, like I said in the past, you should protect not only, M.F. Hussein's right to paint Hindu deities in the nude, you must also protect the people who want to protest against it. You should allow both sides to happen. If you want to burn one religious text at the city town hall or in front of parliament, then, you must protect the right of other people to burn or, to desecrate, other religious symbols of other religions. But my point is that as a wise country, if we don't want to push these issues to its logical end, we must do this by compromise. And if compromise is majoritarian enforced, I feel you have to see the reality of it. I don't think you can, if you do not agree to the idea of majoritarian opinion, then what happens is you cannot have democracy. If you must protect minority rights, it must be reasonably arrived at. By debate, you should do it. I think Parliament should have settled the hijab question before it went to court. And before it goes to Parliament, it should be settled at the local school or college level, at the community level. I think decentralize this, majority is not such a bad word, because in a decentralized community, what happens is there is interdependency of communities. Everyone needs everybody else. There's a kind of Gandhian romantic model of the model village. So we must go back to these ideas, because if you keep insulting the majority, whenever the majority gets a chance, it will hit back with brute power. That's what will happen. That is wrong. So if you do not find a means of civilized debate, if you just keep throwing mud at each other, see, if the best do not represent an idea, the worst will represent it. That is the nature of societies.
So another aspect of the criticism for the movie comes that, it's fine if they want to talk about Kashmiri Pandits being brutalized, but why drag JNU into this? Why drag abrogation of Article 370 into this? Indirectly, you're actually peddling the agenda that the RSS BJP combined wants filmmakers to adopt and spread a certain narrative. And this is also a personal question from my side, because you spoke about how I personally have a lot of similarities with one particular character in the movie played by Darshan Kumar. And I was confused at first because I didn't know what that meant. And then once I watched the movie, I understood what you exactly meant, because, a lot of us subscribed to the center-left ideology for a very long time. And that was the political atmosphere in university campuses as well. But don't you think this is high time that these foreign alien ideologies are rather outdated, and we need to stop romanticizing them?
See, when John Lennon says, imagine a world without, boundaries, without countries, imagine all the people living in the world as one community. That idea is idealist. That is an idealistic thing that comes from a place of love. It originates from there. But when you are in independent India, whether you accept the idea of nation or not. See, I saw one of these intellectuals in a speech said that India has colonized many places, in India. So I'm saying, when you say such things, what happens is that the nation is an idea of agreement. And we made some laws. Those laws are by agreement. We have adopted that constitution, that was debated and made in India. That is what we adopted. And we have made this a nation. So you're not saying John Lennon when you say Azadi. You're not saying Azadi for everybody. You're saying Azadi for a particular state and a particular geography of that state. That's what you're saying Azadi means. And I think there's a problem with that. And the key problem with that is not just moral or, emotional. All that is there, though. The key problem is that seditious to say Bharat tere tukde honge in a university that is run with taxpayers' money. I think there's a problem with that. And I think if anybody thinks it's okay to say that, then I think the government should seriously consider shutting down that section of the university, till better sense prevails, and run only the science side, because I think the science side of that university is good, is reasonable and scientific. The other side is pampered, they feel entitled. And I think you should seriously consider shutting it down for a while if they want to say Bharat tere tukde honge. I think that's it.
So I would like to ask one final comment from you. A lot of people after watching this movie have been asking, how can we help as a community, as people who share the same geography, the same culture, towards this particular cause and towards empowering the country going forward from here, because they believe that there is a certain sense of awakening among common Indians. So what would your call for action be?
I feel, we should, I don't want to appeal to the left liberal side because, I mean, see, they have been always saying that they have intellectual heft in the country. I agree. The question is whether they're honest. So, I mean, if somebody, they say, no, you can actually wake up a sleeping person, but you cannot wake up a person pretending to be asleep. The thing is, there's no point talking to them because they're not going to walk in your direction, meet you halfway and talk anyway. So there's no point. But I want to address the side that we are all accused of being, taking up for, which is the Sangh Parivar, BJP, right wing, whatever names, the bigoted, whatever, but I don't know what all words they use. But, I will say that, see, when you come out of the theater, if you're shouting Bharat Mata Ki Jai, I think that is valid because that film is about separatism. So you are talking about the integrity of Bharat. That's what you feel for. Then I think it's okay. It's the correct response in that you feel moved to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. But when you feel moved to say Jai Shri Ram, I think there is a disconnect there from the film for me because, it is not although the killers used it as a Hindu-Muslim issue. Actually, they used it as a Muslim and other issue, There is only one truth and one God, and we own that. If that is what the killers said. But I don't think all Muslims in India say that. They don't say that, right? I mean, we don't hear that from anywhere else in India, right? So I think it happened then, and it's very particular. So Jai Shri Ram is not a, I would say, correct response, that correct emotion that you carry from the film. This is not about Hinduism. This is about fundamentalism. This is actually not about good religion and bad religion. This is about fundamentalists who are violent. That's what the film is about. The victims are not, like they're saying always, the victims are not just Hindus. Other non-Muslims had to flee the place, they say. So the film is actually about violence that emanates from religious fundamentalism. So when you respond to that, I think your response should be that nobody should be religious fundamentalist. But when you say Jai Shri Ram, there is a danger. I'm saying that they should, they shouldn't take it in the right spirit.
Yeah.
You're very angry with me. When you actually say Jai Shri Ram, it actually descends into a fundamentalism versus another kind of, religious fervor. That is not very good, I think. But I think Bharat Mata Ki Jai is good. And I think that should be enforced on JNU. If with the taxpayers' money, the university prescribes a national anthem, which is about the unity and integrity of India, I think they should be made to sing it. And I know some of my friends don't want to stand up for the national anthem, but I think it's better that you stand up for the national anthem if you want to feel included in a community. But if you don't want to stand up for the national anthem, I think it's not very good to come to a theater, because sometimes I think it is offensive when you do that. So when you go further and you come to the street and say, Bharat tere tukde honge, I think you should not be forgiven.
So it's an absolute pleasure talking to you every time. Thank you so much for joining us. And my pranams to you, and thank you for all the seva that you're doing.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net.